Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive, and the Steelers have advanced to 7-2. Who would have thought 7-2 at this point in the season? Certainly not all of those preseason projection models that thought the Steelers would only get 6 or 7 wins all year long. They are there at the halfway point of the season. We're going to be talking about that and a lot more. The Steelers win over the Washington Commanders, some of the trade deadline acquisition guys paying off, injury updates, all of that. I'm Ross McCorkle. Above me here on the screen's Joe Clark, and this is the Depot Dive. Joe, how are you doing today?
Good. Always a lot better after a win, especially against a really good opponent in the Commanders. So should be a fun week with the Ravens coming up. It's gonna be a big game.
Very big game. Kicking off the AFC North schedule. 3 straight AFC North opponents, starting with the Ravens at home at Acrisure Stadium. So that'll be, nice to start off that way. Hopefully they can kick that off on the right foot. And I think they have that quick turnaround to the Browns just a few days later on Thursday night after that. So both of the times the Steelers play the Ravens this year, they have quick turnarounds to their next game. This is the first instance of that. Unfortunately, the next one is before the Steelers play the Chiefs, which is going to be another huge game. But that is talking point for down the road. We're going to recap, starting this episode off, recap the Commanders game and just kind of offer some of our high-level opinions and thoughts and some of the kind of main talking points from that game. Joe, where do you want to start?
I think kind of just how how they rallied when they're down 10 points. You're going up against a good team, the Commanders. You're down 24-14 early in the second half, and at that point, I'm like, all right, like maybe we can. Not that we would chalk it up as a loss, but just from watching the Steelers the last few years, you go down 10 points in the second half, it almost feels like a death sentence. It feels like an insurmountable lead, and just kind of the way those guys rallied. And Mike Tomlin said today, he's like, they never lost belief, they never lost focus. I think that was probably the most impressive part of that game, just coming back from a 10-point deficit in the third quarter, to go and, I mean, the defense held late. The Commanders there's a point where like, oh, maybe the defensive concerns of the run game are a little bit valid. Jerry Porter Jr. was getting real grabby in pass coverage, and the Commanders obviously have a good offense. So like, oh, is this defense really going to hold after, they had 24 points with 12 minutes left in the third quarter, and the defense really held the last few drives. Limited Washington. I mean, Keanu Benton's play on that Jaden Daniels QB draw, I don't think we can talk about enough. That was a really impressive play. But just the mettle that this team showed is something that I think really impressed me the most. That was kind of my biggest takeaway. They didn't roll over, and I think a lot of that has to do with Russell Wilson's leadership as well, and the fact that he can turn the game on a dime with one deep ball. But that was for me the most impressive thing is this team showed, all right, we can get in a hole, and we can dig out of it. And we saw it a little bit earlier this year against the Colts, but they didn't finish that comeback. And yeah, on Sunday they finished the comeback. So I thought that was really impressive. And for me, probably the most impressive part of the game and my biggest takeaway.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about the play of Keanu Benton, a couple other Steelers defenders having probably their best game of the year, Patrick Queen being at the top of that list. I mean, talk about a good time for him to start getting going right before they enter the worst stretch of their schedule, and he's about to play his former team next week. He had a lights-out game. It was a big part of them containing Jaden Daniels to, 5 rushing yards, and by far the lowest of his career here. And yeah, can't say enough about Patrick Queen. There's a couple plays where he just absolutely showed that sideline-to-sideline speed that we all knew he had. He just hadn't been showing that impact throughout most of the season. You'd see it here and there, but it was pretty consistent in this game in particular. And I mean, we've been talking about Deshaun Elliott all season, but he looked great again. I mean, man, can that guy tackle? He's every time he gets an opportunity to tackle, he is making the tackle with an exclamation mark. It's usually a hard hit, or he's, driving them into the ground. He plays with an attitude, and it's been absolutely perfect for the Steelers. I think Bill Cowher gave him some pretty high praise, comparing him to Troy Polamalu, which was, I mean, I don't know if anyone's really fully buying into that, but just kind of that kind of impact in terms of what he can bring to the team. I don't think anyone's saying that he is Troy Polamalu, obviously, but just uttering them in the same sentence from a guy like Bill Cowher, another Hall of Famer, that's pretty big. And so defense absolutely, they maybe allowed more points than you would have liked, but that leads us into a point I want to talk about, was the fake punt and kind of how this game got started. The Steelers were up 7-0. And this, I think the defense had forced what, two or three and outs basically right off the bat. And the Steelers went, from their own, what was it, 16, or it was deep within their own end. I think 16. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure on that number, but they go for the fake punt and it failed because James Pierre, basically just seemed to be a little bit jittery out there on the perimeter, maybe looking, hoping for seeing the end zone or the touchdown, seeing it before he actually secured the ball, kind of a concentration drop, if you will. And that kind of set up a very easy score for the Commanders to tie the game up 7-7, and then pretty much they were trading punches from that point forward. Joe, do you have any issues with the fake punt? Obviously it's not something that they like premeditated called. It's off of a look, but what's your thoughts on that kind of aggressive early move?
I loved it, honestly. I mean, and I like what Mike Tomlin said today. Like, we're not going to let teams pull that stuff off against us, stress our punt team by bringing in extra defenders to try to block the punt, especially in your back deep in your own area. I mean, he said he'd do it again, and I would hope they would do it again. If you have a wide open guy like that, just completely uncovered, and you have trust in Miles Kilbrew to get that ball out quick, which he did, and he made a fine throw. Pierre just didn't make the play. And now I think, if another team wants to try to, pull that and pull their gunner off, or you pull their guy off the Steelers gunner, then, you're not going to do it now because the Steelers have shown that they're willing to, take that chance and make the play. And that would have been a huge play if Pierre just caught the ball. So I think the execution outside of the actual catch was, pretty flawless. And I really like the play call and I like the aggressiveness. Obviously, in that case, it didn't work out. But if it did, had Pierre pulled it in, and even if he had just pulled it in and gone to the ground, we'd be talking about it as a huge play. And if obviously he could have caught it and he maybe could have ran for a touchdown, he had open field ahead of him. But I like that. I mean, it kind of shows you're not going to mess around. You're not going to let teams kind of pull these stunts against you to try to give themselves an advantage. You're willing to show that no matter where you are on the field, you're going to go for it and you're going to take a chance to try to create something. So I was a big fan of it. I mean, obviously, it would have been better if the guy that pulled off wasn't on James Pierre. But I mean, I don't think anybody's going to pull off Ben Skoranek because he's a receiver. James Pierre's obviously a DB, and he showed why he's a DB. It's like an NCAA 14. Whenever you drop an interception, Herbstreit would always remind you that that's why this guy's playing defense and not offense. I got really sick of hearing that after dropping a lot of interceptions in that game. But that's what flashed through my mind after Pierre's drop. But in terms of the play calling, the aggressiveness, I'm all for it. And if something like that happens again, I hope the Steelers take that chance again.
Yeah, just before we hopped on here, the Chris Boswell appeared on Ben Roethlisberger's podcast, and he at one point in there was basically saying that play call is on 24/7. I think if they see that look, Miles Kilbrew, it seems like, has the autonomy to essentially call that no matter what the situation is. Maybe if it's late in the game and the Steelers have a lead or something, I mean, maybe the coaches tell them, hey, that's not on right now. But it seems like they are able to basically call that at any point. And like you said, I'd be surprised if any other team allows for that because, yeah, now they've shown it, and it's pretty obvious that they're willing to be aggressive like that. Tomlin said it isn't even a gadget play for them. This is a routine thing for them. So they don't view it as a trick play or some gimmicky one-off thing. This is something that is in their playbook, and if the team shows them that, they're going to take that opportunity. So, yeah, I'm with you. No big issue on that, though. Obviously, you look back at those always in hindsight, and in hindsight, not great because the Commanders were given a opportunity to tie the game, and the momentum was basically totally evened up at that point. The Steelers were looking like they were running away with that game at that point. I mean, it was obviously early to say running away with, but it did look that way. The way the defense was absolutely shutting them down. Offense got off to that decent start and everything. So I want to talk about a couple other of the controversial moments in the game while we're on the recap section. Jaylen Warren's forward progress and the fumble. I think our listener question today is about this, so we won't dive too deep into it. But do you think there should have been a whistle blown there, or do you think the refs should let him play on? Because, hey, sometimes those work out in favor for the Steelers.
I think by the letter of the law, and Gene Steratore said the same thing during the broadcast, yes, the whistle should have been blown there. But Jaylen Warren wasn't really, making any effort to go down. He was still churning his legs, and the Steelers have seen those plays kind of work out for them this season. They've made those plays where the running back has picked up extra yards. Maybe they got a push from the lineman to get in. So I don't really have an issue with them not blowing that play dead, even though by the letter law, maybe it should have. I think just ball security is job security. Warren has to do a better job there, kind of just keeping it tucked in tight, even though he's trying to stretch and trying to make that play at the goal line. Um, so yeah, I mean, it should have been forward progress probably, but given how many times the Steelers have benefited from calls maybe not being forward progress this season, just from how tough their guys have run, I think it's fine. I don't really have any huge issue with it. I think the officiating crew kind of plays it. They watch the tape of these teams before they officiate the games. They've seen the Steelers benefit from it. And if the play was blown dead and Warren kept his legs turning out in the end zone, we would be upset about that. So no huge issue with the call, even though maybe it was the incorrect call. So obviously glad it didn't impact the game, because if it did, I'd probably be a little bit more upset about it if the Steelers ended up losing. But given how things worked out, I'm not really too upset about that one. And I think it's fine. And I'm generally in favor of letting guys play through, especially when you have running backs like Najee Harris and Jalen Warren who don't want to go down at first contact.
And this was Brad Rogers' crew, right?
Yep.
They what they call the first the Atlanta game as well.
Of the Atlanta game, yeah.
Yeah, and there's some calls in that game that loomed large too. The TJ Watt timing of the silent count that he got that strip sack on that got called back because they said he was offside. So and the fumble from Jalen Warren wasn't the only controversial play in this game. And I don't want to make it out to be that the Steelers were the only ones getting screwed, because I think there's a conversation to be had about Zach Ertz on that final fourth down pass, which, I guess Gene Steratore talked about this one as well today on WDVE, basically saying, yeah, it probably was a little short just because he hadn't been touched yet and he kind of turned back, so it wasn't like a forward progress thing from where he finished or from where he started with the ball. But yeah, I mean, there's a conversation to be had on both sides. I don't want to paint this to be one-sided, but Dante Jackson holding or no call on what should have been holding on him when he was going on a field goal block. I'm not looking back at the tape. I don't know for sure if he would have got the actual block. It looked like he had a chance, and I mean, given the Steelers' track record this year with blocks, I'm not going to count that possibility out. But at the very least, the Commanders would have had, instead of a 41-yard attempt, a 51-yard attempt, and with a replacement kicker in Zane Gonzalez, with Austin Seibert, or however you say his last name, out. That would have been, maybe made them think twice and maybe punt there. And that's where they got to a 6-point lead instead of having a 3-point lead, which obviously changed the complexion of that for the Steelers offense, putting a lot of pressure on them to basically need to score. And obviously they did. So I guess moot point. But I think there's a couple things that we could circle that if the Steelers had lost, it would have been big talking points this week. Another one, TJ Watt's holding, or what should have been holding against TJ Watt in the end zone, that basically would have ended up with a safety. So the Steelers would have gotten 2 points to cut that lead to 4, and also gotten the ball back. Really not a huge swing there, in my opinion, just because the Steelers ended up getting a touchdown. They still would have needed a touchdown either way, but it is something to point to. And that ref crew didn't have their finest game. A lot of flags, especially big weighty ones on the Steelers defense. Joey Porter Jr., 3 different holding or pass interference type calls that were just kind of backbreakers. I think Dante Jackson had a holding as well. You had unnecessary roughness on, I think, Patrick Queen. So a lot of weighty penalties on the Steelers defense that kind of led to some of these touchdowns, at least early in the game especially. That's kind of how the Commanders got going after a slow start. So do you have anything else you want to talk about from this game before we move on?
Just kind of nice to see the Steelers throw 3 touchdown passes in a game for the first time in 3 years. Pretty ridiculous it's taken that long to get 3 touchdown passes in a game. And I think Russell Wilson's two touchdown passes away from matching the amount of touchdown passes the Steelers had from their quarterbacks last season in 4 games. So it's been nice to watch, some real quarterback play once again. So it's definitely been fun. It feels more like watching the Steelers that I grew up with Ben Roethlisberger, and a lot less like the Kenny Pickett and Matt Canada Steelers, which You probably would have had as good a time as a dentist as you would have had at the dentist as you had watching that offense the last few years.
Yes, absolutely. And Broderick Jones had a bounce back game, his highest Pro Football Focus grade of his career, I believe, and a high 80s, I believe, something like that, pass block grade for the game. So very positive sign for Broderick Jones. We'll see if he can keep it up or if it was kind of a one-off thing, but maybe he just needed the bye week to kind of reset and refocus, and maybe this will be his stretch where he redeems himself for the season. Boy, would that be great for the Steelers offense. Moving on to our next topic, the 2 trade deadline acquisitions paid off pretty much immediately in this game. Preston Smith, Mike Williams. They didn't play a ton, especially Mike Williams, but their impact was pretty large overall. And Joe, where do you want to start there? You want to talk about Williams or Preston Smith first?
I'm going to start with Preston Smith just because I think we're kind of seeing why the Steelers went after him. He was a bad fit for the Packers in their 4-3, but when he was the 3-4 rush outside linebacker, he was really good and he was really productive in this season. He was playing, as a down lineman on the outside of that 4-3, and it just wasn't really working out. And he comes in first game of the 3-4, and he's making a huge impact. He had a sack, he had 2 tackles for a loss. He played really, really well, and I think that's something that the Steelers, they got him for depth purposes, but he still played 23 snaps. Obviously, Nick Herbig was out, but he's somebody that I think can really have an impact on this team in the second half of the season, probably a bigger impact than we even thought. And for just a 7th-round pick, I think that's a really, really, really great pickup, and I'm super excited to see what he can do going forward. But yeah, Mike Williams was awesome. That was a great play. Wasn't even really supposed to be in the game there, but he came through, did exactly what he was supposed to do. Great ball by Russell Wilson too. But that's when you get Mike Williams, what you're expecting, deep passes downfield and being able to win, and that's exactly what he showed. And he didn't even win the jump ball. He just beat St. Juice straight off the line, and went up and made a play and really made an impact on the Steelers. So loves what they got out of both those guys.
Yeah, 9 snaps for Williams, 23 for Preston Smith. Mike Williams, it is interesting because he talked about that route as something that Calvin Austin III had been running all week, more or less saying he wasn't supposed to be in the game there. Calvin Austin had exited the game with, I don't know if they were spotting him for a concussion or something like that. It seems like he's going to be fine for next week, but yeah, he was unavailable, and so maybe that's why Mike Williams was in. But it was interesting because Mike Tomlin said after the game that in the weightiest of moments, we didn't want Mike Williams on the sideline, and more or less said, big guy, one-on-one situation, of course we wanted him in there. And so I don't know exactly what, maybe it is the case that they had Calvin Austin running that route all week, but they didn't know for sure that they would be in that situation with basically the game on the line in a one-on-one situation where you need, basically a big play like that on 3rd down. And so I don't know. Unclear to me because kind of conflicting what each guy is saying. Mike Tomlin seemed to be implying that the plan was for Williams to be in there, and Williams himself maybe hinting that it wasn't the plan. So I don't know exactly what was going on there. But regardless, I think we're seeing right away how good of a fit Mike Williams is able to be. And I think because he was able to make that play, Mike Tomlin often talks about making the big plays in the big moments. And, that was a big play in a big moment, absolutely, which means, is that going to speed his integration up into the offense? Like, he earned trust from Russell Wilson. He earned trust from Mike Tomlin. Do you see this as a sign of like, wow, maybe they are going to implement him quicker? Could we see his 9 snaps go up to 20 this week?
Yeah, I definitely think we're going. Mike Tomlin gave a little bit of a nothing answer when he said we'll see a gradual increase in his workload, but he's like, I don't know what factors will go into that. Said the same thing about Preston Smith too. But yeah, 9 snaps this week. We could easily see 20 to 25 next week, I think, especially because he showed he stepped up in that moment. And against the Ravens, you're going to want to have, as much talent as possible on the field to win. And Williams showed that he's a talented guy. The Ravens' pass defense has also been, a complete disaster this season, especially giving up big chunk plays down the field. So it's a game where I think they would definitely look to get Williams involved. Obviously, good news that Calvin Austin's healthy, so it's not as, Williams is not going to be stepping in to replace him, but I think they can work him into the receiver rotation. And yeah, I think 20 snaps is a pretty realistic estimate for what you could see out of him on Sunday.
Yeah, I agree. And Preston Smith, what great timing with Alex Highsmith's injury, which is going to transition us into our 3rd topic here. Just some injury updates ahead of the Ravens game. As we said, critical game for the Steelers. Alex Highsmith, his dad, was serving as the insider today, basically giving us an update on Highsmith, and said low ankle. So it wasn't a high ankle, which are usually, longer term instead of a low ankles, maybe a couple weeks. And he did say 2 to 3 weeks is what they were hoping for. I don't know the exact language there, but more or less 2 or 3 weeks is what he said. So Highsmith, he missed a few games with the groin earlier. Some more bad luck here after returning and playing really well while he's been back. So he's out for a few more games, but perfect timing with having Preston Smith in the lineup. And Nick Herbig, that's another guy who is now returning, and kind of perfect timing for Highsmith to be exiting. Herbig most likely returning. Mike Tomlin said he was close last week, and more likely than not he will be back. So that means you've got TJ Watt on one side, you've got probably a rotation of Herbig and Preston Smith on the other side. I think it's going to be interesting to see what they do there, because when DeMarvin Leal was healthy and they only had Herbig and Leal actually ended up playing a decent amount of snaps. Just because of the run setter. He's a bigger body that can set the edge a little better. Nick Herbig is absolutely capable of setting the edge. I don't want to make it out that he isn't, but he is smaller, and this is Ravens week, and you're talking about, Derrick Henry. And so do you want that big body with Preston Smith? I am curious to see if Preston Smith's going to outsnap him. Joe, what do you think the division of labor might be there?
I think Preston Smith's going to outsnap him. I think Tomlin even said today that Herbig hasn't really, even though he's close to being ready, he still hasn't shown that he's fully ready, and so he might be on a pitch count on Sunday. Even though he'll return, and I think given the big body that Preston Smith has, he can set the edge against the run, as you said. So I do think we'll see Preston Smith outsnap Herbig on Sunday. I think the injury is a factor, but given the schematics of them going up against the Ravens and having a bigger guy like Smith in there, I think will be beneficial. Even though Herbig might have more speed chasing down Lamar Jackson, I think the Steelers have historically done really well against Jackson. I think Henry is, at least for me, I'm more worried about Henry than I am against Jackson, even though Jackson's been playing absolutely lights out. I just think Derrick Henry, we've seen what he can do against the Steelers in the past and what he's done for this Ravens offense this year. So I think Smith is going to be the guy. It might not be, a huge number, but I do think he is going to outsnap Herbig against the Ravens. That might even out on Thursday against the Browns, give Smith a little bit more of a rest, Herbig get a little healthier. But at least on Sunday, I do think we'll see a heavier dose of Smith than we will of Herbig.
Yeah, and who's over there? I think it's Ronnie Stanley, their left tackle. So
and he's had a good year outside. I mean, the week one against the Chiefs, he got called for that illegal formation for lining up like 4 times. Now I haven't seen that call since that first game. But I mean, yeah, he's fully healthy. He's had a good bounce back year. So it's going to be a challenge for whoever's out there.
Yeah, meanwhile, TJ Watt will have Roger Rosengarten on the other side. I liked him coming out, but he is a rookie, and he's a little undersized for a starting tackle. He probably needs to add a couple more pounds in this upcoming offseason. But I think he's played okay overall. But that is certainly a matchup that TJ Watt can feast on. But back to the injury stuff. You want to take us away with the last couple here?
Yeah, Calvin Austin the third. I mean, I think it was a concussion check because they kind of stopped the game and got pulled off the field. I think he might have returned at the end of that game too, so no worries with him. Dante Jackson and Najee Harris, I think this might be limited early in the week, Mike Tomlin said, but both of them are going to be good to go. Jackson left with a hamstring injury, didn't return to the game. Harris got rolled up on a little bit. I think it was an ankle, but he returned to the game and he looked fine. It looked like a lot worse of an injury than it ended up being, but good news that Harris is fine. Both Jackson and Harris should be good to go. So outside of Highsmith, it's a group that's getting healthier, and luckily they didn't lose too many guys against the Commanders, even though I wrote like 4 fourth quarter injury posts, and I think only Highsmith is the one that's is the only one that is actually gonna end up missing time, which sucks because he's been playing his best football since coming back from the groin. And as good as Smith and Herbig have shown themselves to be, obviously only one game in Pittsburgh for Smith. It's tough to replace Highsmith. You're not going to be able to fully replace him, but I think if the two of them can do it somewhat in the aggregate, then the Steelers will be fine. I mean, and again, it's only 2 to 3 weeks, it seems like. So good news that they'll get him back for the stretch run, and when things really start to matter in December and January.
Yeah, I've got my concerns about Dante Jackson in general. I mean, I think he'll probably play, but a hamstring injury, and on top of that, he's been dealing with the shoulder all year, and I think he's kind of taken a downturn in terms of how well he's played with that shoulder injury. He's really struggled over the last 3 or 4 games in general, and so adding a hamstring into that mix is not great. I was feeling a whole lot better. I mean, Dante Jackson was looking like incredible the first month and a half of the season. It's really taken a turn for the worse over the last couple games in particular. So a little bit of worry there on my end, and kind of hope Corey Trace Jr. comes back sooner rather than later. Not that I think he would take the starting job, but if he can, alleviate 15 snaps a game from Dante Jackson, I think the Steelers would be better off for it. Cam Sutton today was listed as the backup slot corner to Beanie Bishop Jr. I thought that was interesting. He was also listed as the backup free safety to Minkah Fitzpatrick, so kind of showing that he is the jack of all trades in that secondary. Mike Tomlin warned, hey, this isn't an either or between Bishop and Sutton. This is a both and it appears to be that way. I think, Beanie got like 30-something snaps in the slot. Sutton had like 17 or 16, something like that in the slot. And so, the division of labor there probably will even out a little bit more. Sutton will probably continue to eat into those snaps a little bit, but he's probably going to be eating more into, occasionally a free safety, occasionally a box safety. He even played one on the outside corner, especially if Dante Jackson's hurt and Trice isn't back. I think we see a little bit more of him on the outside. So interesting thing there with Sutton. Didn't have a great game overall, at least according to Pro Football Focus. They gave him like a 20 or something, which is quite low, but I guess we'll see how that trends. It was his first game in several months at this point since he was suspended for the first 8 weeks. So that's all for our topics today, but we do have a listener question, which reminds me to plug the number at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, that is at the bottom of the screen, but I'm going to read it off for those of you on Spotify and elsewhere. 412-254-3145. Give us a call and leave a voicemail with a question for a chance to have that answered on a future episode. Or you can text the line. I don't think we've had any texters yet, but you can text the line, and I will read that question off on air. Just tell us where you're from, what your name is, and we would love to thank you for sending in a question. But this is from Brett from San Angelo. He is one of our top listeners. He's given a lot of questions, so thank you, Brett. We definitely appreciate that.
Hello, Depot Dive. This is Brett in San Angelo. I had a point and then a question. The first point is that in terms of Najee Harris's ability, I think one of the most underrated things about Harris is his ball security. That guy simply does not put the ball on the ground. Never have to worry about, is he going to fumble in pretty much any situation. I don't know, does he have a fumble as a Steeler? If he does, I can't remember it. Now, my question, or my, talking point for you is, that seems to be the primary difference between him and Warren, is that Jaylen Warren does seem, from what I've observed, to put the ball on the ground. It actually makes me nervous in late game situations because, again, he seems to fumble more than I like. What is your take? Have you noticed the same pattern that you'd much rather have the ball in Harris's hands than Warren in a late game situation? And are you afraid that if Warren becomes the feature back next year, that maybe that fumble problem will get a whole lot worse? Anyway, I appreciate your thoughts. You all are doing a great job, and I just want to say thank you, and y'all have a good day.
Thanks, Brett. That's nice of you, and we're glad you enjoy the show. And please do call back. We love hearing your questions and your comments on the state of the Steelers. And this one, kind of a two-part question here. I do want to give the facts first, just about, you said Najee Harris, does he even have a fumble? It does seem that way, doesn't it? Because he hasn't had one this season in 9 games, and I believe his rookie season, he didn't have a single one. Actually, the stat here that I pulled up earlier, 392 total touches before his first fumble in the NFL. So he was very much a ball security guy and still is, but he has fumbled 5 times total. 3 of those have been lost. Talking about 3 fumbles in 2022 with 2 of them lost, 2 fumbles last year with 1 of them lost. Now, sometimes those are just like literally him falling on it himself like immediately, and so you barely even notice it's a fumble. But yeah, he does have 3 fumbles lost. But yeah, your point remains that he has been very strong with his ball security. Jaylen Warren, on the other hand, in much less total touches in his career and one fewer season because he entered the league a year after Najee in 2022. He's had 6 fumbles with 3 lost. So they've both lost 3 total fumbles. But of course, Warren has 1 less season and many, many fewer overall touches than Harris in that time. So yes, he does put the ball on the ground more. Joe, is this a concern for you? And is this something that you are considering in terms of who's going to be the lead back for 2025 and beyond? Is this making you panic and be like, wow, we really got to bring back Najee? Where are you at with the whole fumble Jaylen Warren thing?
A mild concern just because in his first training camp in preseason, Warren had issues with fumbles, but he seemed to get that cleaned up. But I don't really think it's a huge issue, especially because if Warren is, the RB1, he's not going to be the type of bell cow sort of guy that Harris has been in the past. The Steelers are bringing another sort of power back or just another running back that can kind of have Cordell Patterson under contract for another year. Somebody else to kind of lighten his load. So he's not going to be getting, 20, 25 touches or at least 20, 25 carries a game. So I'm not really too concerned about it. I mean, I think it's something that it's worth noting. It's worth paying attention to, but I generally think it's kind of an issue that he's had cleaned up. So not really overly concerned. I mean, in the play that happened against Washington was just one of those plays. Just a big pile, a lot of guys going towards the football. Ball gets punched out late. Not really anything that, he just kind of dropped the ball or anything like that. He was just fighting for extra yards, and one of those just plays that happens in football. So not really overly concerned about it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you're going to have him your feature back, if you're assuming he's going to be your Najee Harris, which I don't think he is, then I am a little concerned about that, just in terms of the stats of how often he's putting it on the ground in terms of per touch basis. But I don't think it's a huge concern at this point. I do want to say that Jaylen Warren finally seems like he's back. How many yards? 66 total yards or something like that. I can't quite remember.
He had a good game.
Good game. We're talking. He's putting his foot in the ground, bending things back, bouncing outside. He's showing off that speed. I think he's all the way back from that injury, and the Steelers have another dimension to their offense because of it. So I'm excited about seeing Najee and Jaylen and even Cordell Patterson, the 3 of them work together the rest of the season. I think is going to be exciting. My concern overall with the fumbles, not so much, but I do get where you're coming from there. And I do think if Najee walks, we're looking at, probably a 3rd round draft pick or something like that on a running back. Although the Steelers have traded away a couple of draft picks already, so they're already a kind of light, but that's more on the back end of their back end of the draft class. But it is interesting. They're going to have less picks to work with overall because of some of these trade deadline deals and whatnot. But thank you for your question, Brett. I hope that answered it, and we do want to hear back from you soon. If you want to have your question answered like Brett just did, once again, that's 412-254-3145. I am Ross. That is Joe. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we will catch you guys next week.